Hello everyone, and welcome to our first lecture on relational skills. I've previously introduced myself, but let me reintroduce myself. I'm Kevin Giordano. I'm a lawyer here in Springfield, and I practice at the law firm of Keyes & Donlan. Essentially, my areas of practice, I do general litigation, primarily in insurance defense and healthcare law. So much of what I'm doing is medical malpractice defense, representing physicians, nurses, and other allied healthcare providers who are being sued. I also do general liability defense work, which can run the gamut of a number of issues. I am also actively involved in employment law, and I will consult with practice managers who are employed by group practices from time to time, and also do contracts. I'm a trained mediator and negotiator, and in addition to my professional life, I'm a father of 3 girls. So like all of you folks, I'm negotiating every day, whether it be professionally or personally. And what I will try to do from time to time, as the materials sort of create relevance, I will incorporate or bring in some of the experiences that I have to sort of provide examples to you folks. What I want to do tonight is start with, first of all, negotiation. And what is negotiation? And starting with the goal being, the goal of any negotiation is to get a good deal. So it is to get a deal you want, and it's not simply to get a deal. And what I find, even in my line of work, is that a number of attorneys, or plenty of attorneys, aren't as skilled and adept in negotiation as many of you folks, or as people who do it more frequently. Because oftentimes what I find out is lawyers go to the table simply to get a deal. And, the tactics, the skills are going to vary widely depending upon who you're dealing with. So if we step back for a moment, and this will be fairly basic, but if we look at how people go about getting what they want, obviously the most obvious, probably the farthest end of extreme is war. And in my world, what war looks like are hostile takeovers, litigation, threatened litigation, or other types of legal punitive action. So that's at one extreme. A little short of that will be bullying and aggressiveness. So if there's a distributive negotiation where we're really talking about, one sum of money, for instance, one side claims all of the profit or all of the maximum share for oneself. Winning it all is not just the goal, but it is the only thing that they will agree to. So essentially what they try to do is they try to bully the other side into an agreement, and depending upon the strength of their case or the strength of their bargaining position, they don't provide concessions. The next, sort of walking it back, the next one would be manipulation, and that's where one side employs influence that aims to change the behavior or the perception of others, but it's through abusive, deceptive, or even underhanded tactics. And the one that we're going to be emphasizing through this course is influence, which is the act of power of producing an effect without apparent exertion or force or direct exercise of a command. So really what it starts with is influencing people to believe that, what you believe, which is essentially you've developed through your plan for negotiation, that ultimately the goal for the negotiation, what you think you can accomplish, is also a good outcome for them. So in my world, if I have a case where I'm defending and I think the case is highly defensible, one we're likely to win at trial, I don't necessarily try to bully the other side into just accepting that. What I try to do is influence them to understand that perhaps the offer that we're making is in their best interest, because if they don't accept it, then they may walk out with nothing at all. And so how I go about influencing them and trying to get them to understand that is really dependent upon, or the way that I do it. The tactics that I'm going to use in influence are not going to be the tactics that we use or that are used in bullying or aggressive styles or even in manipulation. So let's be mindful again, which you guys are mindful of hopefully already, but I'll continue to bring this up throughout the course, in that getting what you want through negotiation. So first of all, negotiation is a strategic communication, the purpose of which is to forge a deal or resolve a conflict. And so if that's the definition of negotiation, we still have to recognize that the purpose or the goal of a negotiation is to get the deal you want. And it really needs to be the starting position of where, anytime you enter into a negotiation, that has to be your mindset. And again, this is one of the things as we go through the various skills, and we work through things, I think you'll see why that's important, but also, how you can use relational skills in a manner that to influence that without being unethical in your negotiations, manipulative, or aggressive. And so we use in this sort of model that we're talking about is, a leadership, how we're using leadership and negotiation together. And so leadership is, again, a very basic definition of leadership is the action of leading a group or people or an organization. When you look at that definition, it doesn't connote in any way how that's going to be done. And so it used to be very positional, very hierarchical, leader-centric. And so, employer-employee is one type of hierarchical relationship, supervisor, supervisee, coach, player, parent, child. So you see that these, again, are all sort of authoritative, or can be exercised. Leadership can be exercised in these relationships as very authoritative. So one example of that being where there were two groups of battleships on maneuvers. The weather was incredibly bad. It was terrible, sort of very dense fog. There were high winds and seas. The second night out was even worse than the first. So the captain stood on the bridge all night, and he was primarily wary of getting secondhand reports. He didn't want a chance that his battleship of colliding with another battleship, particularly in such bad weather and open seas. So all night he checked the night sky and what could be seen, and toward dawn, the officer on deck yelled to him, "Light on the starboard side, sir." And so the captain yelled back, "Is she steady or moving?" There was a pause, and the officer yelled back, "She's steady, sir." So he ordered to send a message as soon as possible, "Change course 20 degrees immediately." So the officer sent that out and relayed the message. A reply came back on the radio, and that was passed on to the captain, which the responding message was, "Sir, they suggest you change course." So the captain was getting now escalated in terms of his anger. And so he turned and yelled, "You tell them I'm a captain and I'm ordering them to change course 20 degrees hard now." And he muttered to himself, "Don't these fools know we're on a collision course?" So that message was sent. And the message came back, "I'm an ensign second class and I suggest you change course now." So now the captain's near spitting, and the light was fast approaching. And so he told his officer, "Damn it, you tell them I'm a captain of a battleship and they'd better obey my orders immediately." So that message was sent, and back came the reply. "I'm an ensign and I'm sitting in a lighthouse. It's your call." So, what we see again is sort of this obstinate leadership, this authoritative leadership where he thinks he's going to dictate what everybody's going to do. But at the end of the day, I have no doubt that the captain changed course. So, it's this kind of relationship, this kind of model, right, that is not entirely, but is a model that many organizations are trying to get away from. So what we look at is a couple of definitions within the Komives article that you folks read. There's the Eisenhower UCLA Ensemble Social Change Model, which talks about collaboration among individuals, groups, and communities being essential for social change to occur. And, within an organization, it can be within, organizational change to occur. The next leadership, within organizations is relational leadership, is the process of influencing others to understand and agree about what needs to be done and how to do it, and the process of facilitating individual or collective efforts to accomplish shared objectives. So again, starting to see a collaborative model of leadership. And then lastly, the relational leadership model that Komives sets forth in her paper. Leadership is a relational process of people together attempting to accomplish change or make a difference to benefit the common good. This relational leadership model includes elements of inclusiveness, empowerment, ethics, purposefulness, and process orientation. So we're going to look at these models of leadership and also see how they work with negotiation. But understand from the outset that I would take the position that, for leaders, not every decision, not every, route that's taken is necessarily going to be collaborative. And, not every negotiation at the end of the day is going to be one where, it's necessarily reached on, compromise. There will be compromise, there will be collaboration, but at the end of the day, there may have to be a sort of a hierarchical component to it. And, as we go through the course, think about that, but also I think, you'll see how that gets developed a bit. So for those of you who take the position, that you can't be competitive, for instance, or that you struggle being assertive in terms of seeking what you want, understand that there's going to be times where you're going to have to sort of challenge or push the boundaries of where you feel comfortable and be competitive and be, be assertive, because you're not working, as you know from just your common experience, not everybody you're encountering with or you're negotiating with or working with, is taking the leadership and negotiation program at Bay Path University, and they've probably never been trained on this. So you can't just assume or expect that everybody's going to have this sort of shared goal, this common understanding. It just doesn't always work like that. So again, leaders have to sometimes lead without necessarily being able to just be collaborative at every stage of the process. Just an understanding as to perhaps why these new ways of leadership have developed, and that's taken from the Komives article. So negotiation now, let's kind of circle back to negotiation. And negotiation being, again, a strategic communication for the purpose of forging a deal or resolving a conflict. So collaborative leadership and negotiation, communications that become strategic, are placed at the center of forging a collaborative relationships and negotiating fair and practical solutions. All right, so within strategic negotiation, or within strategic communications, we are, as we go through this process, in order to influence and trying to reach resolutions, we're going to put collaborative relationships at the center of this process and negotiating fair and practical solutions. But again, that does not mean you're not seeking to get the deal that you want. So I want to keep coming back to that, and we'll keep coming back to that throughout the remainder of the course. So as it states there, using the relational leadership model still means getting the deal you want by influencing others. But we do that by utilizing elements of inclusiveness, empowerment, ethics, purposefulness, and process orientation. So we're not advocating strategic communications and getting the deal that you want using manipulation or exploitation. And the primary goal that we'll be talking about, or the primary tool that we're going to be talking about to get the deal that you want in this relational leadership model, is by creating trust. So people trust you when you're genuine and authentic. So that's the starting point, to be mindful of that. So I've got the contrast between Martin Luther King and Brian Williams. So Martin Luther King, we all know, his "I Have a Dream" speech, and that he gave back in 1963 with 250,000 people plus in attendance. And he continued to repeat the mantra that, I have a dream, and he offered up hope that his 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they'll not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, and the desire to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. So he's, through his strategic conversations, through his well-crafted and beautiful speech, he's trying to create trust in his vision. And that's really essentially what he's setting out to do, so that one day, when all of God's children, black and white, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. Now, you contrast that type of messaging and his ability to create trust in his dream versus, Brian Williams. And Brian Williams, many of you may know, was one of the most, or if not the most popular news anchor in America. But, you know, the trust in him plummeted in 1 week after he admitted to embellishing from his war coverage. So he anchored the NBC Nightly News, and he went from being the 23rd most trusted person in America and fell to about the 835th spot in 1 week. And he did that because he kept reporting, although it changed from time to time. The story changed a little bit, but he kept reporting that he was in a helicopter and was forced down after being hit from some rocket-propelled grenades, and crew members who were on the helicopter eventually came forward to challenge him on that story, saying that he was in a different helicopter that wasn't close by, and that he arrived on the scene, you know, after the gunfire had stopped. And once that happened, people started looking at some of his other stories. His coverage of Hurricane Katrina was called into question. Ultimately, he had to step down from being an anchor, and he, you know, later had to admit, and did admit, that he misrepresented some of those stories. So again, and what you think about is, you know, what's the chance, you know, that Brian Williams is ever going to reach back to that level of being influential? So you can manipulate, you can, you know, you can use some of the tactics I referred to later. And if you remember from the book we're reading, the Cialdini textbook, you know, the woman who was selling the jewelry in Arizona, you know, you can use those kind of tactics, but, you know, especially in the day of social media, if somebody determined or identified what that woman was doing, you know, and posted it on social media or posted it as a review, you know, now she's lost trust, or everybody, you know, she can't influence anyone. And not just for selling jewelry, but for selling many of her goods. You know, nobody's going to trust her that she's selling her products at a price that's fair and reasonable, and that even if you're going to buy something from her, you've got to go and research the cost and research whether or not the price is fair. So when we think about all of these things and we go through how we're going to negotiate and how we're going to lead, you know, the number one aspect of trying to influence people is being genuine and being authentic and creating trust. And your authentic composition is going to be different from mine, but yet we can still have very strong and influential leadership identities. So as you're seeing from the first module or two, the process of creating trust first starts with seeking to understand, right? We need to engage in perspective taking and empathy, and you do that by active listening in order to create a solution that meets your needs and the specific needs of the person with whom you are negotiating. So we're going to talk about, you know, and I'm going to still continue to develop, as you'll see, concepts relating to perspective taking and empathy, and where there's going to be a little bit of a challenge for some of you, and there's a little bit of challenge within, you know, what different people believe on this, and that is perspective taking. My ability to kind of see your perspective is different from empathy, right? So empathy being my ability to feel what you feel. And so the question is, as a negotiator, is it important to feel what the other side feels? Or is simply being able to take the other side's perspective enough? And I would say, and we'll talk about this more, to me it depends. But there are instances, if you are capable of doing this, of delving in, feeling what the other side feels, but then extracting yourself back out, because you don't want to be negotiating in a position of sympathy, where now you may not be negotiating what is the right deal or the best deal based on considering their perspective, but instead you're conceding or giving concessions simply because you feel sympathy for the other side. So we're going to explore this more, but I want you to think about it, because when you create your BATNA, and certainly within what I do, needing to create a worst alternative, in those things, ultimately you need to be assertive. And so the purpose of the analysis is to help you make informed decisions about possible options for resolution or a deal. That certainly requires perspective taking. It may require empathy, but then it ultimately requires the ability to be assertive so that you can get a deal that is within, or that is better than your best alternative to not negotiating a deal. So the starting point for getting people in a negotiation to believe what you believe is you need to have conviction that what you have insight to correct, or that you have the insight to correct an unresolved issue. So whether it's an issue involving a client, a family member, work, a friend, a roommate, or a co-worker, first of all, before you set off to influence them, one of the things that you have to do is have the conviction yourself that you have the insight, capability, and abilities to come up with a good, fair resolution to an unresolved issue. And ultimately, by gaining trust, you will ultimately be trying to influence people to get them to believe that they will actually be better off following your leadership. And we'll, again, explore that through the next couple of weeks. And then you'll be exploring that a lot on your own thereafter. So let's look at your authentic leadership. People trust you when you are genuine and authentic. Discovering your authentic leadership requires a commitment to developing yourself. Like musicians and athletes, you must develop yourself or devote yourself to a lifetime of realizing your potential. And certainly by engaging in this program, going through this program, certainly it seems to be that you've decided to take this journey, and you may have been on this journey before you enter into the program. You'll continue the journey through this program, and then you'll even continue this journey right through. I think for most of us, we're still all on the journey of trying to develop our authentic leadership identities, and we do that through the continual understanding of our story, our experiences. Your life story provides the context for your experiences, and through it you can find inspiration to make an impact in the world. The novelist John Barth once wrote, "The story of your life is not your life. It is your story." So in other words, it's your personal narrative that matters, not the mere facts that you have experienced. So establishing personal efficacy, and this is from, again, the Developing the Leadership Identity. Participants had numerous experiences that contributed to their efficacy in working with other people. Students noted how important it was that they learned to relate and communicate with different people, with people different from themselves, and their experiences all sort of contributed to that, as they went through schooling, went to college, and for you folks, post-college, all of these experiences are important and help you learn to relate and communicate with those within your group, within your sphere, that you have to collaborate with, or you have to engage with, or negotiate with. So again, understanding the process of how your leadership identity was created is central to becoming self-aware. It's finding meaning and building identity, as Andrew Solomon said. It's giving a narrative to the events in your life. David Patrick, in the article we read, realized he could not succeed unless he identified and overcame his blind spots. Denial can be the greatest hurdle that leaders face in becoming self-aware. So Patrick finally was able to acknowledge that he still had large blind spots, right? And this was essentially what, the purpose of the Andrew Solomon talk is. So when we go back and we think of our prior experiences in life, we can see how our interactions with others and how we communicate with others has created. But not all of that, not all of those experiences, or not all of our life experiences necessarily, gave us this, acted in a way that was positive to give us the skills. So what we need to do is examine our identity, not just for the positive aspects of what is it about our ability to empathize that's good. What is it about our ability to be in groups and be able to assert our needs in a group that's good? But where are those blind spots that you have that we need to go back and work on, that we need to examine, or you need to examine, and maybe perhaps provide or forge meaning, so that way you can then forge your identity and work on those areas that are problematic for you. And so as we go through the course, what I'm looking for in your postings, what I'm looking on in your papers, are not just what you take from the materials and and understanding the concepts and how you show that you understand the concepts, but it is also about how do you take those concepts and apply them to your life experiences? How do you forge meaning from the concepts that are being presented? And so especially looking for areas of improvement, right? Your journey to improving, to take your leadership identity as it is now and your negotiation identity as it is now, and being able to move it forward. That's what, hopefully, as we explore these materials, that's what we're trying to, or that's what I'm trying to get you to do. And you'll see that every module builds on the prior module, and it's a learning process. So we might take some abstract concepts, but then they'll become more concrete as we go forward. And I'm just going to spend a second on this slide here, again out of the Susan Komives article. And that's really what she's saying, is that you start off with what your leadership identity is now, you become aware, right? And then as you develop this self-awareness, you start looking at the skills that you're learning, you apply new skills, you see how those impact your group ability to engage groups, make an impact in groups. You learn from this, you learn from the group, right? In addition, you continually change the view of yourself and with others, right? And then it continues back to hopefully broadening the view. And so each week, as you become mindful of what we're talking about, you broaden your view of leadership, right? And then it all sort of goes back down, and it comes back down to the next layer. And so it's really, when I talk about digging deep, this is what I'm talking about, getting down to each layer, right? This is the journey that I'm hoping you all will take in some fashion. But it starts with being mindful, and as we're talking about empathy, looking every day and keeping a diary every day, or at least, a couple of times a week. Where did you see empathy? Where did you see empathy be effective? Whether you expressed empathy or somebody expressing empathy to you, how did that make you feel? And if somebody takes your perspective, how does that make you feel? If you watch somebody take another person's perspective, what do you observe about its effectiveness, right? If somebody is not particularly empathetic in a situation where you see or think it calls for empathy, how do you see that play out in front of you? What's your reaction to that? So this is all going to ultimately lead to your final paper at the end of this course. And so being mindful of this, watching this, sort of being a little detective on point of somebody taking someone else's perspective, you taking someone else's perspective, somebody not taking your perspective, or somebody taking your perspective. How do you see that as being influential in a certain circumstance? Similarly, later we'll introduce assertiveness, and how do you feel about, you're just assertive, or you're trying to negotiate something and somebody wasn't a very assertive back. How is all of that sculpting your sort of view of these skills and able to sort of change your view and develop further your leadership identity. So final thoughts, style versus substance. What I mean by that is, as we walk through negotiations, and particularly, there's style to a negotiation. How do you behave in a negotiation? There's substance in a negotiation, and that is, how do you handle trying to get the deal that you want? What are you willing to compromise on? What do you need to not compromise on? So what you'll find is that, there's a competitive style, right? People who clearly are competing on style, and they're aggressive. They may be boisterous. They're very difficult, or can be very difficult to deal with. Now, you can be competitive on style, and some people are competitive on style and they're competitive on substance, and so they're not going to give much in their negotiation style, and they're not going to create concessions. So somebody who isn't competitive on style, competitive on substance, may not be a very good negotiator. And they may, at the end of the day, get what they want, but oftentimes it's because people aren't assertive of their own needs, right? So you can have people who are competitive on style, but yet not competitive on substance. They concede a lot, even though they're banging their fist on the table. And, we basically call that as somebody who's, all bark and no bite, right? Then you get into some people who are collaborative on style, but competitive on substance. And those people at least are trying to work with the other side, but they're competitive and they don't give up much. Now, the best negotiators, I think, are those who are collaborative on style, and they have a mix on substance. They can be collaborative on substance, but they can also be competitive on substance. They're not going to concede beyond getting a good deal. They may concede on getting the best deal, but they will still have a fallback position that gets a good deal, and it's still a deal that they want, right? The need to compete on substance, right, avoids exploitation. And that's really, I think, what the secondary goal of any negotiation is. First, to get the deal that you want, but if you're up against a good negotiator or a strong negotiator, or you're trying to get a deal, again, if we hearken back to that one of those first slides where the goal of a negotiation is not to get any deal. It's not just simply to get a deal, right? So the goal of a negotiation is to get the deal that you want, but there's always a range, or oftentimes there's a range. So if you get to a deal, you want to avoid being exploited. And one of the ways you do that is you have to be competitive. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. So we'll talk about comfort zones, natural responses, and next up will be the value of perspective taking and empathy in a collaborative leadership and negotiation, and that will be next time. So this got a little bit long. Sorry, hope it wasn't too long for you folks. But as always, if there's any questions, any concerns, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to address anything that you have. Thank you so much.